Lylan 1.6, April 18th, 9639 BC. Are you sure about this, Lylan? Hemhut asked her. Pelotamane had been let go and was free to exercise his own will. She chose to trust him rather than subdue him. Hemhut immediately recognized this as a mistake. The future is in a constant state of flux, my love. This time its outcome is contingent on the decision of one of my ever dying. I cannot be everywhere at once. I have to start letting them use their own constraint with my word to guide them. If I cannot trust even one of my own guards, then this future will never work anyway. I can't simply keep captive every person to keep them from their fate. In the end, there would be no freedom. I have to advise them and trust that they will do what is best. Pelotamane has been in my ranks for over 7 years, Hemhut. He will not betray me. I have faith in him, she said. Her chambers were dark. Pelotamane hadn't even seen that Hemhut was standing not feet from him when he thought he was alone with the queen, his mass blending in with the chamber walls. I hope your faith is not misplaced then, he said. Do you still see a future where he kills his wife? Yes, she said. There is always a chance, but I also see many, many futures where he does as I have asked. This will set a precedent for future endeavors, you will see. For if the people at large fail to heed my word in my absence, all is already lost. For so many of them will face similar temptations over the eons. Surely one of my own will not willingly derail the future I have planned, and so early in its formation. We have to trust them. What hope would there be for the world if even my most trusted men openly defy me? The future I see hinges on the cooperation of the people, especially while I am between states of being, between dying and living. If they are unwilling to aid in its construction, there is no hope. While I am between lives, they will have their instructions, their parts to play, the important ones. If I do not have their obedience, I have nothing. This demonstration will serve as a testament of man's ability to be trusted. He has been told to stay his hand. He will stay his hand. If I haven't got my ever-dying, I certainly have no one else. No one except for you, Hemhut. I know I can trust you, but I would like to think that I can trust someone besides you. I would have kept him here, he said. Is there no way to paradise free of this contingency? Must you put your faith in man to beat the path? If only I could be in many places at once, I could exert control without the need to rely on others, and guide the masses in unison. But we are only 2 people, Hemhut. We need the compliance of the masses, their consent to rule, and their obedience, or this will never work. Hemhut let a silent moment pass, then he said what he was thinking. I don't think that this is a very good idea. Let me stop him. You, she pointed at him, not looking at him but staring off into the nothingness as he started to motion toward the exit. You stay right there. You don't know him like I do, Hemhut. You are worried for no reason. I trust him. He will do what is right. You don't move. The capital city was built as a series of concentric rings which encircled one another separated by waterways. The queen's chambers were built into a small mountain crest that thrust through the center of the city. Pelotamane lived in a dwelling on one of the inner rings and was just nearing his home. He was still puzzled by what drive to murder he was to avoid, for he had thus far encountered nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't until he arrived home and found that his wife was missing that he started to suspect something. He immediately thought that something terrible must have happened to her, given that he was warned against murder, and he immediately set off to find her only to rescue her, but not to kill her assailant. This was the conclusion he'd come to. She had been kidnapped, and he was to refrain from murdering her abductor. Easy enough. He was an excellent tracker, as pursuing and hunting game was one of his pastimes. He only saw the one set of footprints leading away from his home. He followed them, mind reeling, assuming the worst, picturing his wife being dragged away somewhere. Her tracks commingled with another's for a moment, and then they disappeared, replaced only by the new tracks. This person must have picked her up and carried her away. There was no blood that he could see, nor could he discern signs of a struggle in the tracks, but he hurried his pursuit, surprised that they led right to a nearby hut. He approached, and at first he didn't hear anything. Then he peeked inside, and he heard what sounded at first like a struggle, but then very quickly he realized it was no struggle he was hearing. Someone was having sex with his wife, and she was enjoying it. He crept inside and took a look around a corner to where the sound was coming from, and sure enough, there she was with her lover on top of her. She didn't see that her husband had looked at them, and as Pelotame was withdrawing, he heard her say, "You have to hurry and finish. My husband will be home soon." He was devastated, but he did not kill his wife's lover. He stayed his hand, and trudged home despondent, head hung low. Then he went inside of his home, sat down, and waited for his wife to come home. She arrived within a matter of minutes. He was satisfied. He had kept his sword sheathed and did not kill this other man he'd found fornicating with his wife. He had shown restraint and obeyed his queen. He thought that he was done. He thought that he had spared the life he was meant to spare. He thought wrong. Then, as she came through the door, he considered the notion that perhaps it was his wife's life that he was to spare, and that he may find himself driven to kill her because of what had happened, and he became distraught. In spite of her deeds, he still loved her and didn't foresee himself killing her. Then she started to tease and belittle him. In their native Atlantean, surprised to find her husband home so soon after his post, she said, "Oh, I didn't think that you would be home yet. Are you okay?" She came directly toward him with her arms outstretched to embrace him, and he let her hug him, but did not embrace her in kind. She pulled back with a smile and asked, "What's wrong?" "Queen Lylin asked me to join her in her chambers today, and she told me that I have a role to play in the coming future," he said somewhat menacingly. "That's incredible," she said, backing away a little, but still smiling. "What did she say?" "She said that all I have to do is nothing," he said. "Nothing?" She laughed. "Well, you're pretty good at that. It should be easy." It was not a good idea to tease him, but she did not know yet that he knew what she'd been up to. She thought that her affair was still undiscovered, so she didn't see the harm in it yet. He didn't like it one bit, though. "Nothing?" he said. "I'm pretty good at doing nothing. What do you think I do all day?" "Nothing," she said. "You stand around doing nothing. You are a guard. Nothing is your life." He stewed for a moment. Lylin watched everything through their eyes. Then he stood and said, "What did you do today?" "Everything," she said. "The same thing I do every day. I washed your clothes and ground your meal, fetched your wine and cleaned your home. I have no life. I do the same thing every day." "You do the same thing every day?" he asked, taking a step closer to her, his expression beginning to betray his rage that he barely had contained. "So, every day while I'm gone, you follow this routine you follow?" "Yes," she said. She began to hear the anger in his voice as he spoke, and took another step back. "I do the chores and I do my duties. Whatever is the matter?" "Your duties?" he repeated. In her chambers, Lylin gasped, and she turned to Hemhut, pointed, and said, "Go, now, get him!" And the giant was off like the wind. He ran down the connecting bridge, trained on the sounds coming from Pelotame's home. He would be there in just a matter of seconds. "Like having sex with the neighbors?" he said accusatively. "Is that one of your duties?" She threw her hands up over her mouth and gasped, eyes wide, and said, "No, what are you talking about? Is that what Lylin told you?" "She told me not to kill anyone today, and I thought that I would be able to keep my promise to her, but I can't. You have wounded me too deeply." And with that, he quickly pulled out his freshly sharpened sword and ran it through her midsection up to the hilt. "I can't let you live." Then he twisted the sword with such strength that she toppled over as he mangled her insides, and he withdrew the blade from her just as Hemhut came crashing through the door. Lylin could be heard all the way from where they were, from within her chambers even, as she screamed, "No!" No! Her cry rang out over all of Atlantis. Then she stormed out of her chambers and made for the streets, addressing Hemhut over the wind, and said in a quiet, malevolent voice as a snarl crawled across her face, "Bring him to me." The poor woman was still alive, but Hemhut had not yet discovered that he could heal people, as he'd never attempted to before, having never been instructed to try, and thought that there was nothing to be done for her. So the poor young woman was left to die alone as Hemhut grabbed her husband, one hand encircling his torso, pinning both of his arms to his sides, and wrenched him from the floor like a rag doll. The air was squeezed from his lungs and his sword fell from his hands. The last thing she saw before she bled to death was the giant silhouette against the backlit entryway, her murderous husband in one hand as Hemhut slipped away. Her name was Hatoya Maya, and she'd held the future in her womb, a future now decimated, carved in twain by love's blade. Lylin was furious, to say the least. She was not thinking straight, and she was so angry that she began to attempt to justify in her mind why she ought to just kill the fool for his betrayal, her own ever-dying Pelotomane. Murder is never justified unless it is the result of self-defense or done in the defense of others. She knew that, but she, just like the trusted one who'd betrayed her, her fallen ever-dying, was susceptible to making decisions seated in passion, and she had never before been so flooded with emotion. Her future had crumbled before her eyes. The future she had worked so hard creating was now without some of its principal driving forces. The history of the future would have to be completely rewritten, and she would have to find some alternate path to immortality. There were still many paths that would lead to peace and prosperity, but none so perfect, none as right as that which she had originally divined, that she was now to be denied. It was the very first time she'd decided to trust and relinquish control to a mortal, and that trust had been betrayed. Everything was ruined, and as she approached the intersection and began across the bridge, she only became more and more angry, already trying to piece together some semblance of her once perfect picture of tomorrow in her racing mind, and finding none so wonderful as the one she'd lost, none where she would ever live forever. That future was lost to her. Eternity had been torn away from her grasp. She saw Hemhut round the corner, coming toward her from the other end of the bridge, and every Atlantean in the vicinity stopped what they were doing and watched as the angry queen stormed down the bridge toward the giant with the helpless grunting man in his hand. Hemhut was not trying to hurt him, but he held him tight, and it made it somewhat difficult for Pelotomane to breathe as he swung back and forth with the giant's walking motion. "Do you know what you have done?" she yelled in Atlantean as she approached. Pelotomane heard a low growl emanate from out of Hemhut, hardly audible in response to Lylin's fury. He didn't have the breath to respond, nor was he expected to. "Everything is ruined!" she yelled, the distance between them narrowing quickly. "Here he is, my love," Hemhut said in English, and presented him to her, holding the guard out in front of him, putting him face to face with her as she finished her approach. "Release him," she said to Hemhut. "Is that wise?" he asked. "I don't know what is wise anymore," she said in English. She always spoke to Hemhut in English. She went on, "I have to pick up the shattered pieces of that which this fool has broken, but things will never be the same. He wouldn't dare hurt me, my love. You can let him go." Hemhut set him on his feet and released his grip on him, but stayed close, watching the ever-dying closely. It was evident that the man could not be trusted. Yet Lylin seemed unafraid of him, content to stand unguarded before the unpredictable animal. Hemhut stood ready to arrest him if he should so much as twitch in her direction. All he saw in the ever-dying was fear, and he knew that fear made people dangerous, made animals of them all. But it seemed that Lylin was correct in her assumption. He made no threatening move toward her. He actually fell to his knees and clasped his hands in pleading, and said in Atlantean, "I'm sorry, my queen. I could not stop myself. I failed you. Please forgive me." Reverting again to speaking Atlantean, as she always did when she addressed her subjects, she said in a scornful and spiteful tone, "You have betrayed me. You have cost me everything. I will no longer live forever as I once would have, because you have killed me." "How, my queen?" Pelotomane shrunk further down as the Atlanteans who bore witness began to murmur amid themselves. Their immortal queen had been cut down, but not by any wound inflicted upon her. Those at a distance strained to listen as Lylin spoke to him. "Your wife was pregnant with your child, the first of 4 that she was destined to birth. You, having discovered her infidelity, were supposed to instead take another woman, one who would have cherished you, and in the coming years sire 6 more children, and you would have all lived happy lives of plenty. These 10 children would have then gone on to multiply and multiply over the centuries to come, and the fruit born of many of their bloodlines would have made possible major contributions to the world, yours and your dead wife's in particular. You didn't just kill one person, Pelotomane. You killed millions. Millions who will now never have the chance to be born. Millions who have been replaced by strangers to me. You have corrupted my future. I now must die in the end. The specific type of genius needed to grant true immortality to the mortal has now been scrubbed from all possible futures, wiped out with the bloodline of your unborn child. I trusted you, and you betrayed me," she said. "If I would have known," he started to speak, but she cut him off. "I told you how important it was," she yelled in his face, losing her composure once more, mind still scrambling through possible futures. "I told you that all you had to do was nothing and my future would be saved. I told you that you would be tempted to murder someone today, and I ordered you not to do it, and you did it anyway. Actually..." She paused and reviewed the future for just a brief moment, and then said to her groveling Everdying, "No, the future doesn't need you." Then she pointed at Pelotomane and said plainly and calmly in English as she looked her Everdying cold in the eye, "Kill him, Hemhut." "My love?" He drew his head back, completely startled by this request. Then she stomped her foot and screamed at the top of her lungs, still staring into the eyes of the Everdying, her hands clenched in frustration. "I said kill him!" Hemhut complied. He reached from behind him, wrapped his hand around his head, and crushed the pleading, subdued, unarmed guard's skull in the palm of his hand, and then released his grip, and the body fell lifeless to the floor. The onlookers were shocked, and many for the first time became fearful of their queen and king. That's when she first saw him, or rather, when he first saw her. Suddenly, a new vision of the future began to unfold before her eyes, and Lylin saw that the distant future was being overrun by a dark figure, and that the same dark figure kept appearing in many different manifestations all over the potential timelines of possible futures. It seemed almost as if it were coming from the future into the past toward her, like it had suddenly consumed the future beyond which she could see and was collapsing it upon her, like it had been hiding outside of time, waiting for her to make a wrong move. It was sharing eyes with her, and many of those eyes were looking directly at her. Those Atlanteans who had witnessed Hemhut execute the guardsman were now sharing their eyes not only with Lylin, but with this entity, this demon. She could feel his presence and feel him getting stronger. It was as though this demon, whatever it may be, had been spread thin over the surface of the world, but that he was now congealing in one place and coming for her. She suddenly became very afraid. For she foresaw now, as she looked into the possible futures, that this demon was coming, that it would manifest completely and take control of her people, moving from body to body through the ages and turn their blades on her, subtly if not outright possessing their minds and commandeering their weapons, if not killing her himself with the trappings of his spirit being, and that if he were to kill her, she would not live again. He was on his way. She knew what she had to do. She would have to kill them all that he could use against her. She staggered as she walked backward, withdrawing into the safety of Hemhut's presence, and she looked around at all of the eyes that were staring at her, all windows to the demon that was screeching toward her from every direction at once. He was all of them. There was only one thing to do. "No," she said quietly as she continued to retreat into Hemhut's shadow. No, 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 no. What's wrong, Leyland? The giant asked, looking out and seeing only their people, no sign of change, nothing to fear in the direction she faced, nothing to indicate what it was she was afraid of, what was causing her to recoil from her subjects as if afraid for her life. A monster is coming, Hemhut, an evil spirit. He is drawn by bloodshed, and we just showed him to our door. The future is swimming with his misdeeds now. What have I done? I've opened the doorway to death. She put her hands up to the sides of her head in exasperation, trying to sort through the possible solutions, but coming up with only the macabre fate that was always her true destiny. Then she decided what to do. My love, he was going to speak, but she interrupted him, falling to her knees and weeping. They all have to die, Hemhut, she said. Every change that we have effected must be unmade. This demon is all-powerful, and he is coming here now to destroy me. He sees through the eyes of others as I do. We have to blind him, my love. I'm sorry, but the very eyes, the very memories of men are weapons in his hands. Go, kill them. Kill everyone in the city. Spare no one, then return to me. I will find a way to fix this while you do what you must. Violin? He did not want to do this. She had never asked him to kill before until just moments ago. Now she was asking him to kill most everyone he knew, all of the citizens and travelers in the capital city. Naturally, he hesitated. Do it now before it's too late. She looked up at him with sobbing, pleading eyes. Please, you have to kill them or there will be no world left worth saving. Trust me, please. He looked at her sternly, and she cried out in anguish as he set to the task and started devastating the city. It took him all of 20 minutes to kill them all, the queen shivering with every one of their screams of terror as the giant systematically annihilated them. And then he returned to find her quivering, soaked in tears, hands over her face and eyes, sobbing uncontrollably. She had used the time to decide what to do, but she was none too happy about it. So much of the population was susceptible to possession and to conspiring in their genes to bring the demon into the flesh and blood realm. So many of them would have to die if she were to get a grip on the situation, and she feared the demon to no end, having witnessed all of the worlds of atrocities he had waiting for her. This fear was the driver, and she decided then that her own self-preservation was more important than the lives of the people, and she gave Hemhut his instructions as he approached her. She was kneeled down with her head in her lap, and did not open her eyes as she spoke, though tears continued to stream from them. I have drawn a demon from hiding, Hemhut, one bent on taking the world for his own. I don't think he can see through your eyes, my love, because I sense that he is scattered now, his focus not redirected, but confused and wavering. He is still looking for me, but he can't see me anymore. He knows we are here, though, so we must leave. Then we have to destroy Atlantis and indeed much of the rest of the world. He is poised to be conceived in so many places and in so many ways, to be set on his path to world domination. It begins when he is born taking a human form, and then becomes evident with the awakening of his mind into his powers as it was with me, and culminates in his death, a death that is no death for him at all, but only the transformation into his final form. We are somehow connected in deeply disturbing ways, like opposite sides of a coin, but he is far stronger than me, and has a power I simply do not possess, that no one does. We have to stop him from being born, and in order to do that, we have to decimate the world. There is a meteor passing nearer to us than the moon. Do you see it? She asked, finally opening her eyes and looking up into the sky, pointing as Hemhut finished approaching her and stopped. She could hear the dripping sounds as the blood ran off his fingertips and fell to the stone ground, but she did not turn to face him. She didn't want to see her love smeared in the blood of her people. She'd already had to see it through their own eyes as he'd killed them. You mean that stone in the sky? Hemhut asked, fixing his gaze to where she pointed on the skyline. She could not see it, but she knew what to say and where to point. Hemhut, on the other hand, could see it clear as day. Yes, she said. I need you to bring it down. We are going to use fire, not to burn down the world, but to drown it. Can you do that for me, my love? Of course, he said. What is your intention? Bring it in fast and aim it at the northern hemisphere. When it collides with the already melting glacial ice trapped on the northern continents, it will cause trillions of gallons of water ice to vaporize instantly, abruptly ending this ice age, and also sending shelves of glacial ice that border the coasts cascading into the oceans. It will result in earthquakes and tsunamis that will initially devastate the coastal cities that are now doomed, and will cause an instant rise in sea levels. Then, the oceans will only swell higher with the endless rain that will follow as the vaporized water falls back down to drown the earth. It will rain in every hospitable place on earth for months and months on end. Any civilization that is not well inland, which survives the initial cataclysm caused by the meteor impact, will be shortly thereafter swallowed by the unceasing rain. Then, the people that remain will forget about us, about everything, and civilization will start anew, she said. Then you and I must go into hiding until I can figure out a way to eliminate this demon, this scourge. There are many options open to us, many ways to defeat him. I just need time to figure out what pathway is best. Until then, I cannot be seen. He is looking for me now, but he can't see me. Like me, he sees through the eyes of others. But like I said, he must not be able to see through yours, or he would see me now. She brought her arm down and pointed to the north, to where she bid her love send the flaming ball of death that she bid him call from the heavens. She had finally gotten a hold of her tears and wiped her eyes as she stood. If it is your will, my love, it will be done, he said, already having redirected the distant meteor towards its intended destination. But must so many truly die? Did you not see this demon coming? No, I did not see him before, not until after you killed Pelotame. Now my hand is being forced, Hemhut, she said. He is literally on the precipice of coming into being in dozens of places at once, like the world's people are competing to usher him into reality. If we simply allow him to come, it will lead to great cataclysm, far greater than that which we will have wrought by our actions. There are many paths that branch from here, and I will need time to explore them before I decide on our next move. But they all necessitate the destruction of this era of civilization. They all begin with the coming flood. I see it. I see the meteor coming. Thank you, my love. You are amazing. It will rage through the sky in the night, this night, a great ball of fire, an omen of death to all but the most fortunate of mankind, and bring with it the end for most. We must go. We have to leave before. Then she looked at Hemhut, and when she turned to face him, she felt the demon snap to attention and all the more furiously focus in on their position. He was becoming so strong, she could almost feel the webbing that comprised him surging through and around her as the demon attempted to manifest in spirit form. Oh no, she said. It's coming faster now. I don't understand. Nothing has changed unless... She stared at Hemhut for a moment, thinking, and then she said, He can see through my eyes, Hemhut. He's found us. He's coming. But he doesn't want me. He wants... She couldn't tell him. If she were to utter the words, it would mean the end of existence. She had never encountered this before, but she had really and truly discovered a gateway to the end of everything. If she were to tell him the truth, if she were to say, The demon wants you, Hemhut, not me, but you. If she were to speak those words, then the universe would literally end. Not blow up, not burn away, just stop. Simply cease to be. She stared deeply into Hemhut's eyes. She always knew that he was special, but it was in that moment that she realized how little about him she actually knew. His fate must be very important, she thought, if saying the wrong thing to him means a literal end of days. She couldn't tell him. She burst again into crying. What? What does he want? Hemhut gently grabbed her by the shoulders, very alarmed and concerned by her sudden outburst. He wants everything, Hemhut. He wants the world, my world, she said, and left it at that. He's coming here, Hemhut. He can't harm you, but he intends to kill me. We can't let that happen. Sink all of Atlantis and remain there amid its sunken ruin. Listen for the sound of my voice when I wake in my next life, then follow my voice until you find me. When you find me, remind me of who I am and bless me once more with sight into the distant future. He will not find a suitable host body before I come again. Our meteor, our flood, will see to that. I love you, Hemhut. Then she stood in front of him, closed her eyes and grimaced, her hands clasped together as if in prayer, and she said, "This is goodbye for now. I need you to kill me now. Until next we meet, farewell, my love." "Lylin, wait," he said, drawing a line. There had to be a line. He would not kill her. "Hesitate no further, my love. He is coming. I love you." She didn't open her eyes, and she shivered as if a cold had crept up her spine and made her body rigid, ready for death. "Do it now." There was nothing. He did nothing. "Lylin, there must be another way," he said. She opened her eyes and looked at him with disdain. He was, like her ever-dying head earlier, openly and directly defying her. He had also failed his test. She had no one. Even her giant had fallen out of her control. He wanted another way? Fine, then she would deliver. "There is one, yes," she said. "If the demon gets his hands on me, I will be dead forever, and he is coming here to kill me. So if you won't kill me, Hemhut, if you also will defy me this day, then I will have to do it myself." She turned and went to break into a run, intent on jumping over the side of the bridge and allowing the water to take her. Then, as was so often the case when shaping destiny, with the slightest touch there came the greatest impact. Like a single keystone, the key to all structure had been removed, and every mountain everywhere had crumbled at once. Like all that had been done was instantly unraveled. He grabbed her by the wrist, stopped her from committing suicide, and her visions of the future instantly fell to dust. She didn't have much time. The demon was coming fast. Appalled that he would stop her from doing what she must, she looked wide-eyed at where the defiant creature had taken her by the arm, and she said, "Let me go, Hemhut." She tried to flail her arm and pried at his fingers with her free hand, but then he took her other wrist as well. "Listen to me, my love," he said calmly, clearly unaware of how grievous the situation was, like he'd heard nothing she'd said. "Let go of me, Hemhut!" she yelled, and she tried to press her feet against his legs and push, trying to leverage herself free of his grip, but he was infinitely strong, and she could not break away. "The demon is coming! If I don't die now, he will kill me!" "Let him come," he said, "and I will destroy him." He tried to be as calm as he could be, and to speak in a soothing voice so as to quell her insanity with an offering of safety and comfort. He truly didn't understand the situation. "You can't!" Lylin continued to fight against his grip. "You can't touch him, Hemhut! Now unhand me! Let me go!" Hemhut thought about it for a second, and then looked her in the eye and said, "Lylin, this has gone on long enough. I am not going to kill you or let you kill yourself, and that is that. Give me a chance to fight this demon." "Stop, Hemhut! You have to let me go! He's coming to kill me, please!" Watching her possible futures fall from reality like leaves from a shaken tree with every passing moment, she furiously tore at him, even trying to bite one of his fingers at one point, but the giant would not relent. A strange silence fell around them as if the whole world had stopped, and Lylin's face became the epitome of terror as she screamed, "No, Hemhut! He's here!" Hemhut didn't see what had caused the wound, but no sooner had the words left her mouth than a huge gash appeared across her face, blinding her in one eye and splitting her skin straight across her lips. It ran from her forehead down to her chin, diagonally across her face. Shocked, Hemhut freed her, and her arms fell to her sides as she stood looking defeated. "There's no time now, Hemhut. You have to kill me. Oh!" She lurched in pain as both of her nipples were suddenly severed under her clothes, and the front of her robe instantly became soaked with blood from her breasts. "Please," Hemhut said. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill Lylin. She was being shredded before his eyes, and he was in disbelief. Nothing was there. Her attacker was invisible and intangible. He was stunned. "Oh no," She began to whimper, and her body lurched as more cuts began to crisscross her skin. She turned away from her giant, her betrayer, and said, "Then, this truly is goodbye, my love." Then she started to let out an uncontrollable, blood-curdling scream as it became apparent that the demon had begun to mangle her innards, and blood began to gush from out of her vagina and anus, splatting on the stone beneath her feet along with large chunks of fleshy tissue, and she seemed as if she was in such terrible anguish that it finally drove the giant's hand, and he closed his eyes and lifted his arms into the air. "Oh, thank you, Hemha," she managed to say, finally seeing a future where she would again appear in the haze, one wholly unknown to her, but a chance nonetheless. Then the giant brought his hands together and crushed her little body, and she was no longer in pain. The silence was not to last long, for as Hemha held her demolished body close to his, he let out a deafening cry that shook the area for miles. Then, in compliance with her wishes, he brought the continent down, and he continued to moan in anguish until the water rushed in around him and silenced him, and he sank with the land he loved to the ocean floor. The world was still trembling from the destruction of Atlantis when later that evening the comet came, and the world began to drown. A flood of biblical proportions swallowed the earth, one every civilization would speak of thereafter, one that would be found in the history of all people everywhere, one that ended the world Lailan and Hemha had set in motion in order to keep it from the hands of the demon. The great flood that marked the end of the Ice Age and nearly wiped mankind from the face of the earth, a weapon in the fight against the demon. There was no telling when or where she would return. Hemha would have to stand ever ready. It would be many thousands of years before he would see her again. Until then, he would have to suffer being without her, his final memories of her reeling in his anguished mind, alone.